The Sex Discrimination Act came into power in the United Kingdom in 1975. It had the aim of preventing discrimination at work based on sex or marital status, protecting workspaces, and empowering women as working individuals. But 50 years later, has enough progress been made in the fight for women's rights in the workplace? The Sex Discrimination Act 1975, or the SDA, was introduced as a piece of case law to help eradicate any discrimination based on sex at work. It meant that during employment and recruitment, nobody could be discriminated against. It also extended into education, employee training, and harassment prevention. The consequence of discrimination based on sex at work would now be faced with legal reprimand, hoping to resolve issues that the Equal Pay Act of 1970 caused, which saw an effort for equal pay for equal work result in businesses refusing to employ or recruit female workers. "1975 was quite a hostile time to be a woman. In 1975, women made up 40% of the UK's labour force, but at this time women were unable to hold a bank account without the permission of a man. Also, half of the female working population made no money at all from their work. Despite the law aiming to empower individuals at work, it didn't necessarily have the best reception. One MP in the House of Commons even said the good it will do will be microscopical and the harm will be immense. After the SDA was introduced, it paved the way for wider equality legislation and case law to come into practice, including the Race Relations Act 1976 and the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995. But what does sex discrimination actually look like? Let's take the wage gap as an example. In 1975, men earned approximately 57% more than women in their weekly median pay. To put that percentage into context, let's consider what this imbalance actually looks like. This rise represents the median weekly pay that men and women received in 1975, according to data from the Office for National Statistics. On the left is the weekly earnings taken home by men, compared to women on the right. It might not seem like a significant difference, but when we put this gap into context for 1 year, it's actually a lot easier to see how your sex dictated your income at work. And this concern isn't just limited to 1975. It's something that we still witness today. Douglas Friedley, editor of Wales Business Insider, even shared his thoughts with me. In our conversation, Douglas highlighted the lack of women noticed in the business elite, with insider media identifying that only 15% of the world's richest people are actually women. He also mentioned the importance of spotlighting women in different sectors of business all year round and making their success stories at work visible in the journalism we consume, not just on International Women's Day. He also noted that during his career, he's seen more women taking places in boardrooms and bringing multiple perspectives into discussions, which is a refreshing change from the golf club boys-only archetype that used to exist for many men in power across different sectors. It's important for a journalist to take a step back and observe those around them, voicing their concerns and communicating it in a respectful and sensitive manner, especially when it comes to sex discrimination. However, I wanted to take a minute in this video to pause and share an experience I actually had on my walk to see Douglas. A man pulled down his window, yelled out the word bitch and drove away. If a woman can't even walk to work, in the middle of the day, in a public area that's busy with people, without being called a bitch, what does that say about the role of women or how we're viewed in public? It wasn't an experience that stuck with me, but it also wasn't an uncommon experience. It was simply just another day. I reached out to the public and asked them all the same question. Did you think that your sex or gender impacted how you were treated at work? And unfortunately, whilst some of the answers do discuss quite sensitive topics, they are very common themes that we noticed amongst the public. Although they're all different people working in different industries, their experiences bring them together. It might be worth pressing pause to read some of their experiences at work based on their gender. One female occupational therapist also shared this with us. My most overt experience of sex discrimination in the workplace was witnessing the sexual harassment of a female colleague. It was my first full-time job, it was in a very small office, and I was 17. The two male managers would often come back to the office after a boozy lunch and ask my colleague to go and make them coffee. Minutes after she went onto the tiny kitchenette, one of them would follow her in. I would then hear a rumpus and her protesting but laughing in a way I didn't really understand at the time. She later told me she felt it was part of her job, to put up with their wandering hands, and that they didn't mean any harm. With those reflections in mind, let's go back to the original video and understand just how this is impacting the treatment of women in 2025. These implicit discriminatory practices are something that we've seen throughout history. Professor Sarah Gilmore at Cardiff University, who specialises in leadership and gender, even co-authored a paper discussing such concerns. Professor Gilmore argued that women's persistence for safety and inclusion at work was part of a quiet feminist revolution that we've seen woven throughout history. But when compared to contemporary feminist struggles, is it fair to say that limited change and progress has been made, or are we truly facing a new era of chauvinism? In 2025, marginal progress has been made, but marginal progress is still needed. Women face the same burden of balancing household labour with full-time work. 40% of women actively choose to work part-time to balance household work and family responsibilities around a working schedule. Contemporary obstacles of zero-hour contracts and continued wage gaps exhaust workers and have redefined women as non-stop labourers in the office and at home. But we've also seen a lot of very slow but very positive change in the last 50 years. The Redundancy, Pregnancy and Family Leave Act of 2023 means that pregnant staff are now greater protected in their job security, and the gender pay gap now rests at 7% for full-time workers and 13% for part-time workers. And even though the SDA was superseded by the Equality Act in 2010, this signposted a turning point in improving equality legislation that protected everyone. And the SDA wasn't something that was restricted to employment or recruitment discrimination. It was a part of a wider fight that feminists have been including in their activism that predates the 70s. It's a movement that spans across transport, journalism, war, race, literature, economics, art, and so much more. So, the future of women at work might not be as nihilistic as the current reality presents itself. The glass ceiling for female labour began to crack as a result of the SDA in 1975, but there's still a lot of campaigning that we can do before we see it shattered socially or economically. Let me know, what do you think the biggest change has been in the last 50 years in the fight for women's rights?